All right, Grandpa. So, let's start this interview. Where were you born? You were born in Marshalltown?
Born in Marshalltown, Iowa, June 3rd, 1923. I was born not in a hospital, I was born at home.
At home? All right. So, you went to Marshalltown, the high school there.
We went
Where'd you go to school there?
to Marshalltown High School,
What was it like?
grade school, and high school, and graduated in 1941.
All right. So, what was it like going to school there?
What it was like, what?
What was it like going to school there?
In Marshalltown? Well, it was all right. I mean, that's where we were born, and that's where we grew up, and that's what we loved. We loved Marshalltown. We had a nice family. We all lived together with my father and mother and two brothers.
Right. So, after you graduated, what did you study in high school?
Studied in high school, regular high school classes, math, just everything, every problem.
Right. Okay. So, did you go to college or no?
No, I didn't go to college because 6 months after I graduated high school, I was drafted in the United States Army,
Can you tell me about that?
World War II.
Tell me about when you were drafted and all
When
that.
I came back,
Tell me when you were drafted. What was that like?
what was it?
They drafted you. What happened?
Well, they drafted me, and I went to Camp Dodge, which was in Marshalltown, or in Des Moines.
No, did you receive a letter or
That
something?
was yeah, right. And they sent me from Camp Dodge. I went to Miami Beach to take my basic training. And when I
In Florida?
In Florida, right. And but in high school, I played in the band. I played in the band, the orchestra.
Did you play clarinet? Right.
I played trumpet.
Trumpet.
Right. And we were in the clown band, and so I was a pretty good marcher.
Mm-hmm.
So when I went into the service, they saw that I was pretty good, and I didn't do much marching because I was good enough that to help them, to help the other guys sort of train. And then at Miami Beach, after I finished my work, I was asked to stay in Miami Beach to work there. And so I stayed in Miami Beach, and what I did was would send the troops for their shots. We lined them up and sent them for their shots.
For their shots, like at the doctor's office, just get so they wouldn't get diseases
to the
and
doctor's
stuff. Right.
office.
So how long did you do that?
I did that for a while, and I got friendly with a fella who was a Secret Service man,
Really?
a Jewish boy, and he came to me and said that they were going to disband Miami Beach and send everybody to the war. So he said, I better get out of there. So I went and signed up to go to administration school. So they sent me to an administration school in Boulder, Colorado.
So you went to Colorado.
So after graduation from administration school, I had a good IQ. I had a #1 IQ, and I could type. And so then they sent me to India.
Just straight from that school?
What?
Straight from the school they sent you?
Yeah, straight from the school.
What year was this? What date was it?
I can't remember the years. Just a couple
Right.
of years after.
You got drafted.
So I got out of the Miami Beach, and I was in Boulder, Colorado, and then I went to for administration school, and then I was sent to I was go to India. I was an air traffic controller. I had never done anything in air traffic, but I was in a yeah, I I was did a nice job, and I learned how to be an air traffic controller. Now, to be an air,
Where in India was this?
where in India? In northern India.
Near the Himalayas?
Well, it's right at the foot of the Himalaya mountains. We were sending airplanes over the Himalaya mountains and into lower India and China, and kept throwing the Japanese back. And
So tell me about what it was like when you arrived in India.
well, you know, I was young. I was 19 years old, and I wanted to get the war over with. I was drafted to do a job, and I did it, like everybody did in those days. They worked hard, but I sort of liked being a traffic controller. We were directing traffic from India into China and Pakistan and the different countries there. And the Himalaya mountains were very rough, very hard. It was very poor, and we had a lot of trouble.
So when you went there, was the airport already constructed, or did they have to build it?
When I went there, what?
Was the airport already built, or
Well, what do you mean?
was it there already?
The base?
Yeah.
Yeah, the base was there, but we opened up the traffic control.
How many other air traffic controllers were there?
We were. What about the traffic control?
Yeah, how many were there? How many of you were there
How many of us were there? We're about 50 people.
at this one
Because
base?
we were around the clock. We were
Right.
we were open around the clock, and I was sort of in charge. I was an NCO that was in charge of the shift, and we
You were an NCO? You were an NCO? What rank did you get? What rank were you?
What rank? When I first went there, I was a corporal. And then after I was there, I got to be a buck sergeant,
Really?
and I was in charge of a shift, and I could be a master sergeant. That's three stripes up and three down, but they weren't they weren't changing anybody.
Right.
They weren't giving anybody any raises. So I finally wound up I was getting $96 a month.
That was a lot. Was that a lot back then?
Well, it was okay. You couldn't buy anything. You didn't
Right.
have much. But I had a real experience as a traffic controller because the planes,
What planes were there?
B-24s, all transports, which we were transporting guns and materials and everything from India into China. And we were down there with was Pakistan, Afghanistan. When the important thing was they would get lost, the pilots would get lost over the mountains, and we would raise them up high enough so they wouldn't hit any of the peaks, and then we'd telephone over from Calcutta or Bombay, and where they crossed is where we were, and then we directed them either into closest airfield.
So, any good stories from being an air traffic?
No,
No?
good stories. Well, how can you?
What about the monkey?
Oh, the monkey. I lived in India. We lived in tents, and one day an Indian man came through and he had the monkey, and I asked him if he wanted to sell it, and he said yes, so I bought it.
For how much?
I paid, I think 30 rupees. That's $9. So I bought the monkey and I made a place out and back. I put up two poles and with a wire across, and I had him wired there and he walked there. And the thing is, with the animals, if you had them, even in the army, they had to have shots. I had a immunization ticket with him, and I used to get shots for him and everything. And I used to feed him. I used to bring him food from the mess hall. In those days, you had candy that came in those little, like coffee came into, and I used to bring him food from the mess hall every day, and we fed him. The important thing was, it was giving him a shower. I couldn't do much during the day, so at midnight, about once a week or once every 2 weeks, I'd take him into the shower room and tie him to the buckboards and turn the shower on, and he'd jump 10 feet high when the water hit him. But then after that he was peak, and I washed him off and I kept him clean because there was a lot of disease in China, in India. Everything was,
What was his name?
well, I had a roommate from New York, and he had a sister, and her name was Toby. So he said, let's name the monkey Toby. So we did. We named after this one of my roommate's sister. But when we'd come, he was out in the back of the tent. When we'd come back there. He'd jump on the side of your leg and go on and reach in your pocket, because all the soldiers had gum,
Yeah.
and he'd take the gum out. He'd chew gum like a regular soldier.
So,
But it was something to do. There weren't very many animals that the guys had, but they had a lot of birds. They had every kind of a bird in. So it was really like a menagerie. Really was wonderful.
what about the Japanese bomber?
About what?
The Japanese bomber that kept on coming
Well,
back.
we had while we were there, we had an airfield, and we used to have a pilot come. We called him Tokyo Joe, and he used to come and drop some bombs on the airfield, so that we couldn't take off. And they didn't do anything. We didn't have our gunners. We had some South African people there. They had guns, but they didn't shoot at the guy, because if they would shoot at him, he'd come where they were and drop the bombs. So, and they didn't, as long as he didn't kill anybody or didn't have anything, they just let him go. And after he'd leave, we'd come out there with the bulldozers, and we'd fix
Was he
the
coming?
holes.
Was he coming from Japan? Do you think?
The what?
Was he coming from Japan? Do you think?
I-
Where was he coming from?
Well, we weren't too far from the Japanese. You know, the Japanese were.
Mm-hmm.
So, it was my idea. I had my captain call down to Bombay and tell him that we wanted a fighter pilot to come up there and take care of this Tokyo Joe. So it took us a while, but we finally a guy came, and we celebrated with him for a while, for a week, and finally one day Tokyo Joe came over and he took off, and he went up and we had a fight. But after our pilot shot at him a couple of times, he couldn't shoot him down, but he let him know that he was going to kill him if he could. So the guy left, and he never came back.
Never?
One time we scared him, he stayed away. But in the camp, we worked around the clock. I worked, I don't know, 8 hours on, 8 hours off, 16 hours on, and 18 off, and so I worked around the clock sometimes. And when somebody got lost, and they were trying to find out where he was and to bring him in, they used to have an officer and me, the two of us. Well, no matter what time of day or night it was, they would call me. I would go out there, and we'd check. Both of us would check. The officer and I would check where they were, and we'd bring them in. And after they'd come in, if they came into our airfield, we'd really have sort of a big celebration. They were so thankful that everything was safe. And they'd always, the one that said, we're going to get you a web medal. So we used to have an officer would sign them to get me a medal, but they'd send it down to Bombay, to the Air Force headquarters. And they would always say, that's part of the job, we don't give any medals for that. So I didn't care. I was hoping to get the war over with and get back home.
Mm-hmm. So how long were you in India for?
I was in India probably about two years.
2 years.
I was in service about not quite 4 years. But it was quite a thing to have when they got lost over there, they couldn't see where they were, and a radio operator was there, and you'd say, keep talking, so while we take a bearing of where you are, how the kid would tell where he was and who he was, and the one that didn't want to die.
So after the war, what were your brothers doing?
My brothers?
Yeah.
Well, Martin, my oldest brother, was 3 years older than I. He went in the Army first, and he was stationed at Camp Dodge in Des Moines. He was stationed there. And when I came there, he shipped me out to Miami Beach, and Matthew was still in high school. And finally, he got old enough, and Matt was in. So at one time, we all three were in the Army together.
Was Martin always in at Camp Dodge?
What?
Was Martin always at Camp Dodge?
Martin was always in Camp Dodge.
And what did Matthew do once he got into the Army?
What Matthew was doing?
Yeah.
He was a cryptographer.
Really?
He ended up in some island somewhere where he was doing some code work. We all had good jobs. And the war was over with.
What do you do? When did you finally get shipped back?
Well, while I was in the service, I had a captain who I worked for, and he wanted me to become an officer, and so he wanted to sign me up and come back to Miami Beach and take officers training. But when I called home and talked to my brother, Martin, he said, don't do that, because if you read the small print, it says if you're an officer, you don't get out of the Army when the war's over. You get out when they want you out. So I turned it down and finished my term there in India. The war was over, and it was rumored that we were going to go to the other place, but we never did. They disbanded us, and I got out. Got out of the
So
Army.
you took a ship and you went back to Marshalltown?
Went back to Marshalltown. where we had a small grocery store.
Your father?
Family, father had it, yes.
What was your father's name?
Did what?
Your father's name was J.S., right?
My father,
Yeah.
yeah, he ran the grocery store.
J.S., right? What was your father's name?
Father's name was Louis.
Louis?
Louis.
Is that who Uncle Louie is named after?
The what?
Is that who Uncle Louie is named after?
Yeah. Uh, it's very strange. We had one little grocery store, and when we all three got back there, Matt went to school
What school did he go to?
at high school,
Oh.
or no, he was to the high school. We didn't get back at the same time. We came back
Right.
later.
You guys didn't go to
We
college?
were in the grocery business. We had a little side street grocery store, which everybody had in those days. So Martin and I were running the grocery store. My father was the butcher, and we were running a little. So we decided that we didn't want to be in a little side street grocery store. So we moved off of the main street of Marshalltown. We moved a couple of blocks off the street and opened up a larger store, which was a self-serve store. And that was the beginning of our stores. And we finally wound up with 3 stores. One in
Three big grocery stores?
3 grocery stores. One in Marshalltown, one in Eldora, and one in Vinton, all in Iowa. Then a piece of property came up for sale in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. It was 10 acres. And we bought the 10 acres, and that's when we started going to build a shopping center.
Was this before you had my mom?
Before what?
My mom was born or after?
Before what?
My mom was born. Was this after?
No, I didn't know I didn't know Dorothy. It was a while later. But then we built this little shopping center, and we built the first shopping center, and that's when we got started. So we sold.
What year was that when you built the first
I
shop?
can't remember the years. So then, after we built the first shopping center, we sold our grocery stores to Nash Finch, and so we had nothing to do. So then we went on and built another shopping center in Davenport, and that's how we got started in the shopping center.
So, tell me more about what was it called back then? What was the company
The
called?
what?
What was the company called back then?
Well,
Your shopping centers. Was it General Growth yet?
it
or
was,
no?
it was called General Growth Properties, GGP. We bought the company, and we started building shopping centers. Then they came out with a REIT, and we got to be a REIT, and we started building shopping centers. And that's what happened. But it was a good life. In every town we're in, we left our mark. We had planned that after we got back from the war, Matt was the youngest. He was going to go to college. And after he went to college, then I was going to go. And Martin was already going to junior college and taking some classes. But by the time Matt got through, that's when I met Dorothy. And we got married. I didn't want to leave and go to college. We figured whatever we'd do by our own. And we'd all 3 work together.
So
And
can you tell me what Martin was like?
You what?
Can you tell me what Martin was like?
What Martin was like? Martin was very smart. When he went into the Army, the Camp Dodge, he had the highest IQ of anybody that ever been there before him, including college professors.
Really?
He had the highest IQ, so high that some captain called him in and said, "You're going to work for him." So he stayed there, and he shipped people out. That's what he was doing. Shipped them out to the Air Corps,
Right.
and that's the story.
What else was he like? What else was he like?
What else? What?
What else was he like? Was he funny?
Well, he was a nice guy. Very good to his family. Very good to the folks.
And then, so what happened? So you stayed in Cedar Rapids for
Did
how
we
long?
what?
How long did you stay in Cedar Rapids for?
How did we what?
When did you get out of the real estate business?
Get out of
General Growth. When did you leave? When did you leave General Growth?
when did we what?
When did you leave General Growth?
When did I leave?
Yeah.
Well, we left after Martin died, and Matt wasn't able to do, and John took over.
No, I mean, when did you personally? Didn't you quit?
No,
No?
it was a long story. But we had a nice life in every town we lived in, Marshalltown, Cedar Rapids, Des Moines. We left our mark, and in Florida.
Can you tell me about what happened with General Growth?
With what?
What happened with General Growth? Tell me more stories about General Growth.
Well, General Growth bought some units and couldn't get the financing, so we lost everything.
No, I'm talking about in the 70s and the 60s.
The what?
I'm talking about in the 50s and the 60s.
Yeah.
What was it like starting it up?
The first shopping center?
Hmm.
Oh, it was fine.
Didn't you own a toy store?
Did we what?
Didn't you own a toy store?
Well, yes. We started some toy stores. In the first shopping center we built, we had one store that a hardware store was going to take over, and he had a partner, and the two of them didn't get along, so they reneged on the lease, and by the time we had got settled with them on not doing anything with the lease, we had the one store and we didn't know what we were going to do. So we analyzed and figured out what we needed was a toy store. There was no toy stores anyplace, so we opened up a toy store. So that each shopping centers we opened up 3, 4 centers, we built little toy stores. And I kept running the toy stores.
Just you? Just you?
Hmm?
Just you? Not.
Well, yeah, no, we all worked together.
Hmm. So then, what else? We talked about the war, Mom. What else was it like back then?
What else? What?
What else was it like back then?
What do you mean? What?
What else what else did you do in the
Oh.
you did when you were at General Growth?
Well, we had some motels We had 6 motels.
Oh, isn't that why you went across country?
Went where?
Isn't that why you went across the country
Yeah.
to check on the motels?
Yeah, we were running the motels.
Mm.
But we had a lot of things. We had the toy stores. We had the Holiday Inns. We had 6 of them. And that was it.
How'd you start the toy stores?
He already said that. What about?
How did you start the toy stores? Did you already talk about that?
Yeah.
What was it like when you came back from the war?
Well, we know my father had a grocery store and a small side street grocery store. You don't remember that because they don't have them anymore. But you remember, we had the grocery store, and we just improved on the grocery stores. We moved off the main street. We built a shopping center.
Can you tell me about General Growth when it went public?
Wait a minute. I have more questions about the war. What
We talked about
What was it like when you heard that Hitler had died and that the Allied forces won?
Who had died?
Hitler. How did you learn that we had won the war? Do you remember where you were?
I was in India, and we used to have news come over all the time.
From where? On the radio?
Yeah,
On the radio.
yeah,
You had a radio operator?
right. And at the time we knew what was going on, and we heard that the war was over. I remember that day
What
very
about-
well
what about-
because
Sorry.
I remember that day the war was over because once they announced that the war was over, every one of the guys got out their guns and they shot them off. And I was half afraid that night that somebody would get killed. But they all were drinking pretty good and shooting off their guns and everything.
Was there a black market when you were over there?
Yeah. So,
Well, so how long before you were shipped home?
well, it must have been about 3-4 months.
You stayed there.
I stayed there in India, right?
Was it hot?
Well, we were still sending airplanes from India into China, and
And what was the worst experience you had during the war?
the worst experience. One night I was working. I was working one night about midnight.
You were doing, what do you mean working?
I was doing,
Watching the airplanes?
yeah, directing the airplanes coming in and so on. You got to be a traffic controller to know what these airplanes would come in. They'd come in.
Yeah, stacked.
One would be at 5,000,
Yeah,
one would be
stacked.
55 stacked, and you'd bring this one in lower, and then you'd raise them all down, which was serious work. A plane came in, and it blew a tire as it landed, and it went over to the right side, and we had about 6 or 7 airplanes on the side, and it went in and it smashed all those airplanes, all of them. If it would have gone over on this side where I was, I wouldn't be here today.
Wow. Wow.
And then another thing,
Wait, so that shook you up a little bit, huh?
it sure did.
Was the pilot okay?
It was the pilot.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was okay, but all the airplanes were all smashed. And then, when I was ready to come home, you came home by points. And if I'd have been married with one child,
Ah.
if I'd been married with one child, I would have had more points and I would have gone home first. Well, that plane Never got there.
What happened to it?
Madeline, the Himalaya mountains were one of the worst ones there was. There was
Yeah.
bad weather. And so when I
The plane crashed.
I rode up the thing, it was a plane. The only way they recognized a plane was that the co-pilot his body was over a tree. And the rest of the
Goodness.
bodies were eaten up by
Animals.
tigers.
So
Wow.
did you knew people on that flight?
I would have been. If
But you knew people on the flight?
I what?
You knew people on the flight?
Oh yeah, I know all the guys I worked with. Most
So
of the
they survived the war and then they were killed going home.
killed on going home.
That's
But the
heartbreaking.
only reason they found the airplane was because of the co-pilot's body was over
Yeah.
the tree.
Wow.
And while I was in India, we had a chaplain, a Jewish chaplain, that came there, and he was a rabbi in Waterloo, Iowa for a while, and he knew who we were and so on. So that if he ever came, he came about once a month. He came, and we'd have services. We'd get the guys
Oh.
together. So I sort of played rabbi for a while. And the thing, we used to have, he'd call me if a Jewish boy was killed, I'd go with him and we'd bring the body back and say a prayer.
How were they killed?
The pilots.
The airplane would hit a clump of trees or would take.
So
We
it was
had a lot of
more. It
damage.
wasn't from the enemy. It was flight
nothing.
accidents.
No, we didn't. We kept the enemy away.
Yeah.
But I knew in those days that the Pakistanis were going to give us trouble.
Really?
I knew then, and you got to remember that India was under the rule of the British, and I knew they were going to fight and get to be free, and they did. But the Pakistanis would come on and in our airfield, and they'd be up high, and he'd say, "I'm running out of gas." So we'd send the planes from where we were to the homing to a different place. They'd go and get up, and we'd let that guy come down, and I'd send somebody out there to check his gas, and he had more gas than he knew what to do with. So I used to write up.
Why would they
reports.
want to land?
Huh?
Why would they want to land if they didn't?
They wanted to come to land quicker. They didn't care.
Oh, I
And
see.
I-
Instead of waiting, their
That's right. Instead of waiting in line, it was very dangerous. We never lost anybody, but at least it took a while. So
Wow. And what was the best thing that happened?
the what?
The best thing that happened?
Oh, I don't know. Everything. It was a good life, staying alive, you know. Some things that you can't.
Talk about.
I was in charge of about 50 guys,
Wow.
and we also had a dog. People with dogs, and they were with us too, and they lived right with us.
They were Indian or they
Huh?
were American?
Americans.
Americans? They brought their dogs?
No,
They found dogs that they adopted?
Army dogs.
Oh.
One guy from a Jewish boy from New York. He was getting out at the end of the war, and he wanted to buy his dog, and he wanted $25. The Army wanted $25 for the dog. He didn't have the money, so he asked me if I'd give him the $25, and he'd send me my money. I never heard from him.
Yeah.
I
Well, that
never-
was a good deed, though.
Yeah.
Wow.
But boy, those dogs were fierce. God, we used to sit out there and listen. Boy, he did. Those dogs just sit right there by him. I didn't want to fight those dogs.
Why did the Army have dogs?
Hmm?
Why did the Army have dogs?
Well, to protect us, around the camp.
Hmm.
We had a lot of trouble. There were black troops.
Black troops? You mean Indian?
Yeah, American troops.
Oh.
They were bad troops.
Americans?
Mhm.
Americans?
Mhm.
What would they do?
Well, they were working, taking care of the airplanes, gassing them and everything.
Maintenance.
In those days, the blacks were separate. They weren't in with Americans.
That's interesting. Josh, yes? Wait one sec.
So is that a cause for